Tributes are pouring in for Václav Havel, the Czech dissident playwright who has died at the age of 75. Havel was at the forefront of his country's Velvet Revolution, which freed Czechoslovakia from Soviet domination. Simon McGregor Wood looks back at the life of the anti-communism icon who went on to become the first elected president of the Czech Republic.
The leader of a small country who became a giant on the global stage, a statesman who was at least the equal to many with whom he rubbed shoulders. Václav Havel's standing stemmed from his commitment to the freedom of the individual and to the power of ideas and human rights. And in the last days of communism, no idea was more powerful to him than an independent Czechoslovakia, unshackled from Soviet domination. In November 1989, Havel led the Velvet Revolution, inspiring the Czech people to claim their freedom.
He was firmly of the opinion that the values that Europe represented was far stronger than what any totalitarian power could control over time.
A great man, a real example. We will miss him. May he rest in peace.
Czechs had bid for freedom before in the Prague spring of 1968. Moscow sent in the tanks then. The true face of Soviet power was laid bare. 20 years later, the Soviet system had collapsed. Czech freedom would not be denied this time. Russian tanks went home. In 1990, the former playwright and political dissident became Czechoslovakia's first post-communist president. In 1993, he was re-elected as president of the new Czech Republic, having overseen the peaceful separation of the new Slovak nation. He never lost his common touch or forgot where his support came from.
In the last 20 years, I was not only a guy holding a guitar, I was an ordinary citizen, and as such, I always trust you.
He guided his country with a sure touch, balancing old alliances with a new future for his country at the heart of Europe and as a member of NATO. But his defining legacy will always be the emergence of his beloved country into freedom after years of subjugation. On Sunday, Czechs left candles in Prague's Wenceslas Square in memory of the passionate intellectual and the modest rebel who led them to freedom. Simon McGregor Wood, Al Jazeera.
John Keane is a professor of politics at the University of Sydney. He is also the author of Václav Havel, a political tragedy in 6 acts, and he joins me from Sydney. John, good to speak with you. Look, you knew Václav Havel, having edited his first book. Before I ask you about the man himself, what's your reaction to his passing?
Well, I'm personally sad. I think the outpourings globally in his honor were expected, and of course they're justified. But I think just at the moment, most of the obituary, the feel of the obituaries, are to do with his final stage of his career as a global statesman, a bit less about his middle stage, where he's a politician, and almost nothing has been said about what I consider to be his great 2/3 of his life as a poet and a playwright and as a political essayist.
Oh, well, John, take a moment here. Talk about that period of his life. What's the legacy of the work? What work do you point to as being emblematic of this man as a playwright?
Well, it should be remembered, born in 1936, part of a group called the 36ers, that Havel and all Czechs lived under 8 regime changes in the 20th century. That's quite a lot. And most of that was an unhappy experience of dictatorship or totalitarianism, or post-totalitarianism as he called it. And so Havel's great strengths in that period should be remembered. A man of courage, of honesty, of decency. He spoke about, as a principle, living in the truth, and he tried to live it. The first time I met him in Prague was emblematic of that, sitting in his Vltava river apartment with all of the apartments stripped out, all of the plasterboard off, because bugs were being removed from his apartment. It was like a scene from Gene Hackman's The Conversation.
Yeah.
That period gave birth to some of the great plays. I think The Memorandum, which he finished in 1965, was probably the greatest. It's a satire on total power. In brief, it's the story of a regime that tries to clarify communications, to stamp out misunderstanding by introducing a new language called Taidapi. Nobody can understand it. The whole thing turns out to be a mess. And I think in terms of his political writing, there is no doubt that the greatest political essay that he wrote, and it's widely considered to be the greatest from Central Eastern Europe before the Velvet Revolutions of '89, is a long essay called The Power of the Powerless. I had the privilege of editing it. It was his first publication in English, and it contains a simple truth, but a very profound idea, which is that the powerful, even the most powerful, backed by armies, are actually powerless in the face of the downtrodden, who, if they decide to change their ways of being, refuse that power to live in the truth, as Havel put it, then they are nothing.
Well,
so power comes from below. It was a very radical idea of Havel, and of course it was the founding principle of Charter 77, and it was ultimately the spirit that drove those revolutions in the autumn of 1989.
John, well done. What a wonderful tribute. Can't thank you enough for your time. John Keane, a professor of politics at the University of Sydney. John, once again, thank you.
It's my pleasure.